So you have decided to show up again for Think and Link. This one is Think and Link Brand New World. We're going to be talking experience design, and it's going to be a fascinating one for sure. It's good to be back. I've been out for a month and a half with our guest host, Kitty Hart, a couple of times from Dynamico, as they become a sponsor of this wonderful thing. I've been anxious to get back, and honestly, a little bit nervous. Like, what is this going to be like? But it's good that I've got Gail and Eric, because they're phenomenal guests. And it's going to be a great conversation, and really, really interesting to talk experience design in two sectors of our economy that have probably been most impacted by the pandemic, and in really, really interesting ways. Hopefully, good ways coming out of it. So a word for Capsule and a word for our sponsor, Dynamico, which is a HubSpot implementation team, and they are guest hosting every other week or every other session, not every week. And Dynamico, and then Capsule, which is a special projects firm here in Minneapolis, worldwide headquarters. All we ask is that you refer us to your friends and bring your friends to this event whenever you can, because we love it. And then I should acknowledge before we get started, because I'm going to turn it over to the guests to do their introductions, and then Kelly's going to do the first question. But before we do that, I have to acknowledge the gentleman with all the books behind him, which is Joe Pine, the great one, that wrote the book, The Experience Economy and Authenticity. Let's not forget that great book as well. And honestly, I think our guests got more nervous that he was going to be here than me and Kelly interviewing.
You're correct. That's right. There's no hiding it. Let's just get it out on the table.
Let's get it out there.
I'm here because of you, Gail, because I wanted to see what a CXO is up to and what she does. I've written on CXOs and wanted to learn more.
I love that. Yeah. So you started this whole thing, Joe. So we're all doing this because you and your co-author started this little adventure. So yes, this is going to be amazing. I am going to hand it over to our two guests to introduce themselves and a little bit of background, and I'll try to drop in some other stuff about them as we go, because I have a huge fondness for each of our guests. But Gail, take it away with a little bit of your background, and then we'll go to Eric.
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Gail Grimmett. As you just heard, Chief Experience Officer of Wheels Up, also a Senior Vice President at Delta Airlines. So I'm a dual passport citizen. I am an economist by background. So clearly that's kind of a oxymoron that now I'm doing experience stuff, but as hopefully we'll talk about, I think experience is part art, part art and part science in terms of some of the data. I spent 20 years at Delta Airlines in a variety of roles. I tend to get moved around quite a bit in roles that require transformation and change. So transformation and turnaround in some instances. I left Delta in 2016 to go be president of Travel Leaders, one of the largest luxury travel companies in the country. And then I took a few years off personally. My husband was ill. And so I had the pleasure of being able to take a break from my career and spend the last year of his life with him, which was, a great, blessing across the way. And then I was ready to come back, and Delta and Bastian continued to come up with all these ideas of what I could do at Delta. And, as we came up with the ideas, I really wanted something that was new and different. And they were about to make the investment into Wheels Up and sell Delta Private Jets. And I had the pleasure of being able to choose that job. Delta has a history of putting executives into companies that they have investments in. And I won the lottery. That's all I can say. I really was super excited to be able to join them. And I've been with Wheels Up a little over a year and a half.
Love that.
Yeah.
The economist part, we got to talk about that.
I know.
I don't think we're going to have enough time.
We didn't talk about that last time. I know.
No, we didn't. We're going to have to extend this another hour right now. Anyway, Eric, take it away.
You bet. Thank you for the time. I'm really thrilled to be here and with all of you. So my name is Eric Bruce. I joined the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. very recently in a new role. in a new division at the National Gallery. So I'm the head of visitor experience and evaluation. I have a background in arts and culture organizations, music. I worked at an opera company and also then at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, always in service and in a similar role there as the head of visitor experience and insights. And so I'm very focused on the experiences in the museum setting. We're sort of putting together a department that is half operations and the front of house teams and staff and volunteers that go into making the experiences possible on site. And the other half being the evaluation and insights of our audiences and consumer research. And it's sort of a pleasure, and it's really exciting to spin something up at the Nation's Art Museum. So pleased to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Eric, I have to ask what the lapel pin you have there, because it's hard to tell what that is. And
right.
Sorry.
Thank you for asking. It's our new logo. The gallery recently went through a rebrand, and when we reopened again, our West building, we launched a new brand for the National Gallery of Art, and this is our new logo, and I'm pleased to wear it on my lapel.
Wonderful.
Cool.
Well, eager to learn more about the rebrand. Very excited to have you both. Erin, if I may, I'm going to jump right in. There's a lot we'd love to cover. I don't know that we'll get through all of it in 50 minutes, but let's start with the obvious. We talk about experience design. And Joe, I hope that I do this justice in terms of our general definition of the practice of designing products and processes and events. We talk about the impact this pandemic has had on museums and travel and really everywhere. We've all seen the impact of that. I know we'd had some previous discussions about specifically what you saw in your respective industries, what was troubling about the change, but really what benefits and positive aspects have come out of this that can turn into more permanent behaviors in terms of how we design experiences and how we connect with consumers and customers. Can we start with just what's inspiring you about the changes you've seen? And Gail, can we start with you? And then Eric, would love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, happy to. I think, what was interesting for us as the pandemic first hit is, we went from being a private air company that people took for a vacation, leisure, business, to really one, quite frankly, for many people, one of necessity, right? We transported people to their last shelter, to where they were going to shelter in place, or moved their family members up to be with them when everybody was sheltering in place. And so it was interesting to see the different use of how people were thinking about leveraging private air. I think, in our world, we have to earn that business every day. Like you cannot have a great experience and then think that you've got somebody hooked for life, right? It has to be consistent across the board. And when people weren't traveling, we pride ourselves on not just, being a private jet company, but, we're a lifestyle. We have a lot of on the ground events in ways that we would connect with our members that went away. And so, of course, like many people, we did do virtual things to help stay connected with our members when they weren't flying. And so a great example is we usually have 3 tentpole events a year, one for Super Bowl, one in Augusta, and one for Art Basel. And as we came up on Augusta time last year when people weren't traveling, we created an at-home virtual event for Augusta, so our members still felt connected to us. We brought on some of the players. We had some, on-air interviews. We did a lot of trying to recapture that moment in a different way, and we did that throughout the whole pandemic. Private concerts with some of our ambassadors, whatever the case may be. And I think, look, it's not the same thing as being there, but what I will tell you is what I loved about it, and what we'll take with us as we move forward, is it certainly allowed a much broader number of people in our member database to be able to participate, because not everybody goes to our tentpole events. Not everybody can, not everybody can make it. They're not going to travel, but yet we provided a way this time for really people to participate in a different way. And I think that that's something as we think through the on-ground experience of how do we keep a broader group of people engaged, we'll take with us. I also think, quite frankly, the whole idea of cleanliness and safety is never going to go away from this point forward. And so making sure that you could not over communicate in this situation when people were flying, that they were going to be safe, that we had procedures. We were working with Dr. Scott Gottlieb on everything that we were doing from beginning to end. And we need to make sure from our standpoint that we continue to communicate those things that we put into practice are going to be here to stay as we move forward as well, because that level of safety and health needs to continue to stay at the forefront, because it's going to be at the forefront of all of our members and customers' minds.
Right, that's great. And Gail, you had mentioned, and obviously people miss those in-person experiences, but virtual is likely here to stay in some form or fashion. Because to your point, again, broadens the reach, the accessibility for those that can't be in a physical setting. So, thank you for sharing. Great feedback. Eric, your thoughts on how your environment has changed and evolved in that design experience?
Yeah, I think it was a time where your experience design strategy was really pressure tested. There were just, constantly changing variables as new information came in, continues to be, needs for new messaging, new rules. But I agree with Gail. I think safety, it became very much on brand. I think there were concerns about that initially, especially in such a highly designed space, and it could be difficult to execute it well. But I've seen a lot of museums make some fun tweaks, like framing their plexi in a gilded painting frame or something like that. But my colleague, who's the chief of design here at the gallery, was kind of comparing it to those moments in airports after 9/11, when airport lobbies weren't quite ready to shoehorn in all the new needs and equipment. But now, as you see new spaces being designed, you can see that thought being given to integrating that part of the experience and doing that pretty elegantly. In terms of inspiration, I think my inspiration came from the partnerships and the increased understanding sort of across divisions or multidisciplinary understanding that was formed from it. Because at least in our field, I think it brought a lot of siloed areas together, and they really had to listen to one another deeply and regularly, constantly, almost, to get the work done and to iterate. And now that we've been doing that for more than a year, I think it's going to be a lot harder to think about your efforts as being siloed. And in museums specifically, when you're talking about the virtual experiences, I think National Gallery, when the pandemic started, I was in Minneapolis. I actually started this job kind of mid-pandemic, but the National Gallery, as an example, I think has a big opportunity for growth in the digital space. Museums just broadly do, but we get about as many visitors on site as we do on the website. It's about 5 million a year in both places. And I think there's a tremendous area for growth in that moment.
Wow. That's a lot of bodies.
Yeah.
Right. That is a fascinating metric to think about, right? I mean, who else has the equivalent number on both sides? Well, yeah, that is interesting. Thank you, too. That was great. Gail, you've been, one, I should jump in with a couple of things. One, housekeeping things. You'll see some links in there on our speakers in the chat. You can also ask questions in the chat if you haven't been to a Think and Like in the past. Please do. I expect a really good question from Jill Pine to really freak out our speakers.
Exactly.
In some way.
Eric will be more than happy to answer the question.
Eric will be more than happy. Jump in. Have you pulled out your book, Eric? Did you pull out the Experience Economy and look at the notes? Anyway, Gail, you were, last time we talked, you were traveling. You were on a plane. What do we have to expect? What does the future look like in air travel for the person who hasn't been on a plane for 18 months, me and all of the others? And then also, I think it would be good just for everyone to get a little bit of background on Wheels Up, because I don't know that everybody knows what that is and how cool it is. So if you could just do a little bit on that, and then tell me what our travel looks like, generally speaking, for the Wheels Up people, but also for the cattle, for the rest of us. Yeah.
So Wheels Up is 7 years old. It was founded by a gentleman by the name of Kenny Dichter, who is a consummate entrepreneur, but probably what's so impressive is he's managed to disrupt the same industry 3 separate times, which is pretty phenomenal. I mean, it's hard enough to do it once, and then you get to do it 3 different times. He was the founder of Marquis Jets. You know, it used to be the days when you would want to fly private, days and decades ago, you know, the only way to do it was to buy an airplane, which was fairly capital intensive. And then it opened up a little bit more and some of the barriers came down, because then you could do fractional ownership. And so it didn't quite cost you as much, still expensive, and still limiting to the plane that you owned the fractional ownership in. And then Kenny created with Marquis Jets the private jet card, right? So where you can, again, tearing down the barriers to entry to, you know, get more people in, because that capital investment wasn't necessary. And then he sold Marquis Jets to NetJets, and they merged, and Kenny moved on and did his own. He founded Avion Tequila. He did stuff outside the industry, but didn't feel that he was done yet. He really believed that there was a bigger market out there for private flyers, in a manner that made it easier to access. And the data continued to show that most private flying is done within a 2.5 hour area. And so he founded Wheels Up. And this time he did it, instead of the private card, he created a membership organization that was both more of a lifestyle brand than an overall just private jet carrier. But really with your membership, it gave you access not just to one plane, but to a fleet of different aircraft to optimize where your spend would be. And really brought digitization, there we go, to the forefront with the app and how people book. And again, really opened up the addressable market and thinking through the whole experience from beginning to end. And now we're about to go through the next phase, where we're really creating a marketplace for the organization, where you don't just have to be a member anymore to be able to leverage Wheels Up. So it's been a phenomenal opportunity, and the company's done great over the last 7 years. Interesting, and maybe we'll talk about it later on, but interesting to go from a company that is data rich, data heavy like Delta, to a growing company and learning how to scale. And when you start really thinking about the experience overall, and learning about the things that you need to think about differently as you start to scale an organization. It was great to be on the road. It was so much fun. It was like the first day of school all over again. The airports, the airports have learned, and it's great to see from an airport perspective, from an airline perspective. I flew commercially out to Denver, and look, they've got good processes in place. So again, health and safety, minimal touch. Opportunities to get through security, out to security. I would say we all are creatures of habit, because everybody keeps their distance until it's time to board. And then everybody continues to rush the boarding door. So that has not died. I don't think it even died during the pandemic. But I do think that, what you'll see on all fronts is, for the airports now, and I think for the commercial airlines, the thought process is, how do you keep what you have going, but yet you also have to scale, because the number of people that are going to be traveling now, and the number of planes that are going to be put back in service, you need to be able to scale what you were doing on a much smaller size with a smaller population, and being able to really be able to deliver on that to a much broader population, because there's a lot of demand out there, and people are ready to be on the road.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. The increase in demand, what that's going to mean as far as planes coming back online. I hadn't really thought about that part of it. Yeah, and how cleaned up they are, or are they covered in dust? And what is that experience going to be like? And I also have to note, I've been in the past a very big critic of airlines in general, and airline travel and the experience around it. mainly because it's a good test of things. But Delta has been exceptional as far as, amongst all the set of airlines you've got as far as options. I've been surprised a number of times. This is not a paid endorsement at all, but it is something that's fascinating how it's been, and I've written that in other places too since. But Eric, back to you. And when we had our last conversation, you're talking about how the fact that experience design is not as built up as a practice area as you'd expect, at least as I would expect. And it sounds like as you would expect either, or as well, at the National Gallery. So I'm curious about what you found so far and how interesting that's been as you've, I guess, dug into the dusty areas of the National Gallery.
No dust in the National Gallery.
No dust, no dust. No.
Yeah, no, I thank you. It's, well, it was an interesting time to start, first of all, and I don't want to focus on the pandemic too much, but to start kind of mid-pandemic, I think it's a good example is that there hadn't been, an established even visitor services team. The team that we're putting together is a mix of education staff, security staff, retail staff, education volunteers, and the National Gallery for the very first time was needing to handle timed admission passes. And sort of that operations, muscle was not even built up. But I think in terms of overall experience strategy, I would describe the approach as being really well-meaning, but fragmented. And, or maybe in the initial stages of maturity, and that everyone is kind of focused on their own areas or their products and not necessarily united around goals, both as an organization or for their audiences. And you kind of end up with a disjointed user experience, which is, I think, one of the reasons our department and division were created. As an example, the print map here is different from the map that is on the app, and that's different than the map that is on the website, and that's different than the map that's printed on the wall. And I think that's an example. You have four different maps, and one visitor looking at all of them and trying to figure out where the heck they are. And so that's maybe one example. There's no one really forcing the connection of the dots there. And the National Gallery, it's I think kind of a unique beast. I know it came from MIA in Minneapolis, which is also a free museum, and the National Gallery of Art is free to everyone. And we're not part of the Smithsonian. We're actually, part federal, part private, but we are on the National Mall. And we have a healthy mix of funding. And to some extent, I think that dulls your survival instinct and that drive for innovation. And you can kind of, I think we're talking about with the visitation, you get a fire hose of people almost no matter what you do. And you can kind of kick back and not stress that much about it, because the areas where you're being measured, the KPIs are really anchored in things like attendance and visitation. And so that's one of the things we're trying to do here too, is to lift up the other experience measurements as at least being co-equal in that process. And so kind of pulling everyone together with a unified vision for the audience is central to the work. I think one final point, I was talking to our chief digital officer the other day, who's also new. And we were just sort of reflecting on this interesting spectrum that museums exist in, which is somewhere between, serious study university and theme park, and the different expectations of audiences and of internal stakeholders for what a museum is. And so, thinking about it through the lens of audience and audience personas is helping us to frame that going forward.
Yeah. That is,
That's great.
Four different maps.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'll send you pictures.
Oh, Kelly.
Oh no, I recall in a previous conversation you talked about how you're looking at audiences differently, and then how do you marry the logistical operational side with really the insight of understanding who your audience is, why they're there, and creating those meaningful moments, which applies across industries. So, but you don't typically think of theme park in a museum setting, but actually that's a great way to articulate it, because in fact, there's a joy that it brings, to the customer, to the visitor. So very interesting. Thank you for sharing. I'm going to take a quick shift in what we're talking about here. I want to touch on culture. I think we can all agree that culture is really important to all great leaders or leaders within an organization. And I'm curious, both of your thoughts around what culture means within your organization, sort of describe what that looks like. And again, not to focus on pandemic, but how are you maintaining it with your people, with your colleagues, when you're not in a physical office environment as we typically are? Just would love to get some insights from you and what you're seeing. Who'd like to start? Gail, you want to start?
Sure. So I'll start with, let me start on the Delta side. There is nothing more special than the Delta culture. I will say that, across the board, it is an organization that really, we, as much as we are obsessed about the experience that our customers have, we're equally obsessed with, making sure that we're supporting each other, and we follow, what we call the rules of the road of, we stand for integrity and honesty. We keep our deals, we hold each other accountable. I mean, we have a whole plethora of values that we hold near and dear to our heart. The culture at Wheels Up, I felt right at home day one on joining, because you've got part of an organization that feels the same way, and an incredibly passionate group of young, entrepreneurial, excited people ready to build something. And I think that has been truly amazing. What was interesting to us, though, and really it forced us to think through our own employee experience during the course of the pandemic, is right before the pandemic, we made 2 acquisitions. So we made 2 acquisitions of Delta private jets and then Mountain Aviation, and then we got sent home. Right. And so many of the people could not experience how special that culture was when you're not face to face. And quite frankly, when I was on my business trip last week, I was with 4 of my fellow executives. Well, our entire executive leadership team was hired during COVID. And so that was our first time meeting each other in person, face to face as well. And so we, during the course of the pandemic, and because we were sensitive to the employees not really getting to understand the magic of the Wheels Up culture, we created a virtual series called Up Together. And every other week we would distribute, it fell into 5 categories, but we would talk about learning and, what's out there. Like, we would share an article about how to keep your own home office well organized. People would share their playlists. People would, we would do it to, for Cinco de Mayo, we did a margarita making class. I mean, we have a lot of talent in the organization. We had different morning workouts with different people who, really focused on, one taught yoga on the side, one worked out constantly on, one was a runner. And so we really found other ways to give each other insight into all the different people that work within Wheels Up, in order to try to bring some of that cultural piece together and keep everybody tied together.
That's wonderful. Which class did you teach, Gail?
I did not, nobody wanted any of my skill sets, which was very unfortunate, but I participated in many of them, by the way. And it's, and I will say this, because probably I was outnumbered. The amount of talent, we had a band. I mean, the amount of talent we had in the organization it was fun just to see what everybody does, on the side along the way. It was a lot of fun.
I bet. Things you would never know about.
Yeah.
Thanks, Gail, for sharing. Eric, what are your thoughts? Culture.
Yeah, I love work culture work. It's one of the things that I was really involved in at MIA in the new employee onboardings and all that. And there's some saying, every organization has a culture, and it forms in one of 2 ways, either by intent or by neglect. And I believe in calling it out and the type of culture you want to be. Here at the gallery, starting during the pandemic is kind of odd. There are also a lot of leadership changes. Almost the entire executive leadership team is new. And a lot of changes at the division and department head level as well. And I think just with all of us and with the pandemic, a kind of blanket of uncertainty is there just generally. It's a time of tremendous change. There's a feeling of loss of control. in the world to some extent. And navigating that, is no joke. I think about Brian Stevenson, who's the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, and talking about the importance of getting proximate and doing whatever you can to connect with the other people in the organization. Right now, I Zoom, therefore I am. But I am on site every day. There's still maximum telework going on. And I think museums too are such physical spaces. We are a 25-acre campus, 3 office buildings, 2 museum spaces, a sculpture garden. And I think unique cultures develop sort of area to area. So we're doing our best to also spread our teams across all of them to make sure that we're connected and talking with our colleagues. And I would call out, when it comes to culture, I think specifically the really critical connection to work at the front of house and with front of house teams. And of course, I'm a little biased, working with them so closely, but they're really out there every day listening to the audiences and listening to the customers. And they're the ones that implement the vision of the brand. And when I was in Minneapolis, I worked maybe for 7 years or so for our COO, and my peers were the heads of security and facilities and human resources and accounting, and they thought about visitor services as really an operation branch of the organization. And then they moved us into the division of audience engagement, thinking about the front of house experience as an extension of the promise that the brand is making. And to show up in that way. And so I'm a big advocate for making sure that you're listening closely to those front of house teams, showing them dignity in their work and making sure that they are heard and that you lift up their voices in a co-equal way as well. I think there's someone who did this really well is Hubert Joly, at Best Buy, who I think his new book is a great read, Heart of the Customer. But I think that focus is really important. And ultimately, when it comes to experience strategy, what's the Mike Tyson line? Everyone has a plan until they're punched in the face or something. I think the best laid plans can't account for it. And that's really where culture steps in and helps to make the experience a great one.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Great answer. Anytime you can involve Mike Tyson in experience design conversations is always going to be good. That is terribly fascinating. And at some point in time, we've got to at least talk a little bit about the things we were exploring at MIA together and what that would have been, because that has to happen at some point in time in some place. Because that was a fascinating conversation. I'll go back to you, Eric, on the importance of experience design coming out of this pandemic. We went in, if we look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we went all the way down to safety in a hurry. And I think a lot of people still are not back up that ladder up to the higher levels of Maslow's perspective on the world or on human behavior. So coming out of this pandemic, what are you seeing as important as it relates to experience design? And how are we going to get people to, 5 million people showing up again and feeling not just safe, but getting to be able to get past that primal part of their brain and actually enjoying the experience?
That's a great question. My mind goes first to, I think in terms of being more or less important now, I think it's the same level of important, and experience design has always been important. But I think this really shook everyone awake and has them paying more attention to the importance of experience design, especially industries like ours, that aren't really focused on digital. That was a wake-up call. I mean, across the world for museums and about their role. And it also had them thinking, not just about the digital space, but what is an on-site experience for? What are we trying to do? And will people even want to come back after all this is done? And safety is certainly a big part of it. I think out of all of this, what I've personally seen rise up is the importance of employee experience. As organizations struggle, as they work to retain talent, to think about the employees that have been going through this pandemic and what they're going to create and the burdens on their own life. More and more, I think in terms of the overall customer experience discussion, I'm seeing a lot going on in EX, and what do they need to feel valued? Do they feel safe and prioritized? And through that, can they then come to what the future of the work in their organization will be? And so that's where my mind goes first, is to making sure, organizations making sure that they're thinking really closely about the experiences for their staff and everything their staff do to make, the experience on site possible. We've seen a lot of demand to return just in reopening the galleries. I think there's a lot of pent up interest to come back and see those things that, you love and have missed. But after, after that wears off, I'm curious to see how we continue forward. But I do think that lifting up, when you're testing, when you're surveying audiences, to also be looking at the staff metrics as well, and do your staff know the top 5 pain points of your visitors, and do they know the top 5 desires for innovation, and are you able as an organization to unite around those things? And I really don't think experience design can happen in any one part of the organization, but it's about buy-in, and it's about vision, and it's making sure that vision is shared and translated across a multiple building campus with over 1,000 employees. And I think that's a primary focus going forward.
Yeah, that's great. Gail, you had a perspective when we talked about this, about seeking out the problems and the challenges. I'm curious.
And Eric raises a great point. I mean, for us, our business has been growing during the pandemic. So, we've been in a growth phase. But again, we're a young company, right? And it's funny, when I came from Delta, we have net promoter scores down to the gate level in all of the airports. So we have the data rich. I mean, people used to think, when I ran the commercial organization for Delta in New York, and, having that part of the organization, I had an event almost every night, and people used to think the job was so sexy. What they didn't see is during the day, me calling over to LaGuardia to find out how often the urine traps in the men's bathroom has changed, because, we kept getting complaints about the men's bathroom. And that's the #1 driver of customer satisfaction in an airport, are the bathrooms, right? So you really have to get into it. And I think, it's been interesting. When Wheels Up first started, it was easy to say we knew our members because we were so small. I guess we really did know our members, and we knew what they wanted, and we knew what was important, and we were able to do it. But as we're now growing to 10,000 members, my point when I first got there was, you can't say that anymore. You can't say your members, because the depth and breadth of the diversity, everybody is looking for something different. And I think getting everybody on board look, everybody's on board now, but the initial phase is uncomfortable. We used to send out a post-flight survey that was one question: how was your flight? 1 to 5. And that was it. So if they rated it a 1, you didn't know. You would know unless they went on social media, and that's usually where they put most of their comments, right? So they would rate you, and then they would tell you how they really felt out on social media, but you didn't know what the driver was. And so, we really started to, quite frankly, expand the whole, data gathering, input, wanting to hear from people from the beginning of their experience to the end. Because when you have limited capital to invest, you want to make sure you're going to invest in the pieces that are going to make the biggest difference. But it was uncomfortable for people, because people said, well, you're having us ask the members to look for things that are wrong. And the answer is yes, I am. I mean, there are times, listen, I mean, we all have to face the fact that every once in a while we wake up in the morning and you got to look in the mirror and say, I look really bad today. I have bedhead hair. I look like I haven't slept for hours. But we all, before, you can't fix what you don't know is broke, right? You have to be able to take those experiences and map out where's the biggest bang for the buck. How can we regularly deliver, right? We have to earn the business all the time. And quite frankly, it's not just on the experience of flying, but in an aviation world, look, and it's the same way in other industries as well, but we're going to have service failures, and how you recover from those service failures makes all the difference in the world. And so every part of that member experience, customer experience is being mapped out, from communications to booking to service recovery, for us to really make sure that we understand every part of that journey and where the pain points are.
Absolutely. And you said this, Gail, we talked about this, people want a voice, and it's really important that you understand their concern before it hits social media, because they will be vocal if there's not a channel or a platform in which to share their feedback.
Yeah, especially in an industry like ours, right? I mean, and that was when we first expanded the survey, the pushback that we got was, oh, less people are going to respond because it's longer, right? And and my point was, especially in an industry like ours, where, look, flying private, we might have opened up the addressable market, but it's still, nobody would ever say that it was cheap, right? And so people who spend money, they want to be heard. And so what we were really able to show is we had a 10 percentage point increase in the amount of survey, the percentage of people responding to the survey. I mean, we get over 40% back now, which is, a great number in terms of return rate on post-flight surveys. But because people do want to be heard. They want to be heard.
Right. And Eric, I'm curious, again, staying in the same vein, we talked a little bit about that welcoming experience, and then even a comment card, right? It's sort of, you're saying there's something to address there in terms of fragmentation happening in the customer feedback, at least in your organization, is, and just creating those feedback and learning loops. Any learnings just in the time that you've been there that you're like, this is what we need to address, and here's how we plan to address it?
Yeah, I mean, you've really gotten to it. And again, returning to the theme of, I think the gallery is in the growth phase in terms of customer experience maturity. Those issues were really handled in buckets and not brought together in a cohesive way. And so that's been a major undertaking for us, is to do an audit of sort of the customer service loops in the organization. And I think that's a really elegant connection between the operations areas and the evaluation areas, is, you only get so much through a comment card to some extent. And at least in museums, you tend to get people who are, really mad about something, or really happy about something, or really, really want something, or want to learn something. And I think there's some nuance that can get lost in them. And so incorporating, the employee experience in that, the volunteer experience in that, their feedback from what's going on, and sharing that in, as real-time a way as possible with those in leadership and those who are making these programs and products for the customers, for the audience. It's just absolutely critical to the work, and something we've been paying a lot of attention to. And right now, or when we first started, the comment cards are forwarded to the Office of Security, which then replies between a mix of the security and legal team. And you imagine how some of those might look. So we're taking a good run at that with a lot of well-meaning partners, and it's our goal to make sure that we can increase those learning loops, the frequency with which they happen, and really turn it into audience-facing change as quickly as possible.
It's interesting how the little things make a difference, though. Because you talk about the front of the house, and for years, Delta really, I mean, it's been on our list every year to win the JD Power survey, right? And so, and we did this year, which it took for the first time since I think it was 1995. So super excited about it, but we did a lot of research on it. And one of the things, and this was years ago, we wanted to understand what went into the survey. And they started with, you start with a certain set of scores, but like, let's say you're flying overseas and your in-flight video goes out, you lose 60 points. It is what it is. I mean, you lost the video. If you boarded and the flight attendant did not greet you with a warm smile and a welcome aboard, we're pleased to have you on board with us today, 200 points off the top. Because that, and so think about that. Think of the investment that everybody makes in those in-flight video screens, right? And yet the biggest driver is free. It's the people
Yeah.
who are your brand, right? And it
Yeah.
sets the tone for everything.
Mhm.
And in a world, I think, Eric, I mean, that's where there is a lot of similarity where, your front of house staff is the brand. Our pilots, our front line, our member services folks, they're our brand. And that was just such a powerful message. I've carried that with me for years, because sometimes it doesn't mean you need more investment. Sometimes you just gotta look at, other parts of the experience itself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. The memories that are made in each of your experiences, and it's usually the human interaction and the stuff that doesn't cost a lot. I wouldn't say it's free, but it definitely doesn't cost anywhere near as much of an investment as a video, right? Just a little human training, a little time with people to get them to see the importance of this experience and what kind of memories they're making for other people. Yeah, really fascinating. I am going to now, every time I go to the National Gallery, put in a comment card now that I know that goes through the security department. At least one. I'm very curious about what comes out the other side. And then I'm going to call Eric. This is fascinating. So experience design as a concept, and Joe Pine might correct me, but I believe his book was published in 1998. So that puts us almost at the 25th anniversary. 99. Damn it. I was 1 year off. Okay. So it was 99. We started our firm in 99 on the inspiration of what Joe Pine was doing and writing about. But if we look, so it's not an old thing, right? It's not yet. Now it's in the boardroom. There's CXOs, which is fascinating. And each of you have some experience with the barriers inside of organizations. So I'm curious what you run into. What are the big barriers you run into? And then how have you, broken them or circumvented them or gone around them or figured out a way to get past? So Gail, what kind of barriers you run into when you talk about customer experience? Or
I think sometimes there's a couple of things. I think one is, first, there's that spirit of denial every once in a while when you bring something up, right? And we have to make sure that, again, we understand that it's not our perception that matters. It's our customers and members' perception that matters. So first, it's just acceptance of everybody understanding, what we need to go do. I also think, to Eric's point, he brought it up quite a bit, but the whole idea of silos, you need to break down the silos, right? We have cross-functional meetings every other week across the entire organization to go through the member metrics and what's come back in the surveys, right? And that's both the post-flight survey, we have lost member surveys, we have profiles, right? We go through it, and collectively we come up with the list of initiatives now of what we need to go chase and what we think is going to make the biggest difference. But we had to tear down those silos, because otherwise everybody was working off of a different set of assumptions and a different perspective, which was their own perspective and not necessarily the perspective of the members and customers, right? And so I think, for us, that probably was one of our biggest, pieces. But what I love right now is that, we're getting to build this and build it during a time of growth, so we can get smarter about it. And, we're not waking up to this, years from now when we're already there and realizing that we had it, we should have started years ago. So, it's exciting to be growing the area at the same time that the company is really growing. Getting the right skill sets in place and the right disciplines in place, straight up front.
Great.
That's great. Eric, what is your perspective on the barriers? Breaking them.
I would call myself a barrier. I think in a way, but not to get too philosophical about it, but oftentimes I find that if something is not moving, it's because I have too tight a hold on it. And I really think experience design is one of those things where you need to work, as Gail's saying, across the organization. And it's, if you hold on to something so tightly, your knuckles start to get white and it can't slip out. And as soon as you kind of open it up and share it with others, the blood can flow back into the muscle and it can make its way around. And I think one of the secrets and something we did at MIA actually was when we were working on our insights team prior to hiring the people who would be doing the insights, we went around and essentially created personas for each division in the organization. And we interviewed the key stakeholders there and said, what do you think about the customer experience? What do you think about data? How do you look at it now? What is it that you would need to make sure that, no matter what research we have, we could have the best research in the world. If we didn't share it in a way where people could hear it, it wouldn't do much good. And so I think that's just absolutely critical to the work we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. Almost teach them how to fish at the same time. Let's have them going through the exercises with you. That's great. That's wonderful.
Yeah. I'm going to put someone on the spot on this call as we're getting close to the end of the show here. Mr. Joe Pine, Godfather. Should I call you that? Can I call you that of experience design? I would love to hear if you have a question for our guest from what you've heard today, or anything to even extrapolate upon from what you've heard.
Well, I've got 6 or 7 questions that I wrote down, and given the time, I'll only ask one of them that both can answer, although I will connect you two together as well, since I once sat across the aisle from Mike Tyson on a Delta flight. But,
Oh, there we go.
Wow.
That is a great connection.
So the one question I'll ask relates to, well, one, Aaron, to recognize that Maslow was wrong, in the sense that that the bottom is not safety and need. The bottom for human beings is meaning, as Viktor Frankl taught us. If you don't have meaning, you can live without safety in the Holocaust, and security if you have meaning in your life. And related to that, I wanted to ask a little bit about purpose, about how, Gail, you talked a little bit about how your customers were different during the pandemic, and Eric, I'm interested in. And what I'd love to talk to you about is the fact that you're not charging admission is just wrong, but we'll save that for another time. Feel free to contact me. But did the pandemic change how you thought about your purpose, about why you exist? Particularly, Eric, you're thinking about 5 million visitors on the web and 5 million visitors in your 25-acre campus. Does it really recognize, hey, it's not just about the campus. Our purpose needs to be different than getting people here and seeing our stuff, so to speak.
Curveball. Eric, you want to take it away?
Yeah, sorry, we didn't.
I'll stick around on that first. Thank you. Yeah, I think absolutely. And if I, not necessarily in a National Gallery, but maybe all museums is maybe historically the approach has been, we are so great, and we have artwork that is so great, and we have all of this knowledge, and you should be so lucky to come and see what we have prepared. And I think there's a shift away from that to thinking about the audiences and what they need. And even in the rebrand of the National Gallery of Art, in our mission statement, it's about exploring art, welcoming people to explore the art, but also creativity and our shared humanity. And I think that's a through line in our work, and how we see our work changing over time is really, museums are about exploring much more than just the art itself, but what the art says about us. And I find that to be really powerful and part of the vision that we're working towards. And so that's where I go to first with the question. I hold that up when I come to work every day and think about that as central to what I'm trying to accomplish.
I love that way of thinking about it, holding it up. I have an old friend who talked about holding up the orb, right, of the purpose of the company is what he did. And they had an orb that symbolized it.
Wow, that's great. Great. Did you
Gail?
have a question for Gail specifically?
Well, I wondered about the same question, but I could also ask about, again, about how you think. What I really want to know is how you think about yourself as a CXO. What is the role of being a chief experience officer?
Okay, so I'm going to answer the first question first, and then I'll talk about the CXO role. So here's what I would say about purpose is, when we did see that the purpose of why people were traveling or using us during the time of the pandemic, we really thought to ourselves, we have a chance to step up now of who we are, because we are giving, we're across the board, again, culturally, we're driven by wanting to be part of the communities and wanting to be, helpful in people's lives. So twofold, we reached out to many of our partners during that time and said, look, you've been our partners for a long time. You have your people who are already important to you. We want to help. For anyone right now within your organization or who are, a part of your sphere of customers or base, if anyone needs to get home, they don't need to be a member. Like between now and then, we're gonna, whoever needs access, we want to be there, right? And so we really reached out to a lot of our partners to make sure that we were doing right by those who had always done right by us over time. And the one thing about, there's a lot about Kenny Dichter that I respect and admire, but part of it is his sense of wanting to give back to the community. We have a Wheels Up Cares fleet where we choose various organizations and causes that are dear to our heart in order to support along the way. And we came up with Meals Up, part of the Wheels Up Cares organization, and partnered with Feeding America with the hopes of bringing awareness and raising and inspiring over 10 million meals. And we're at 70 million meals right now. We have a beautiful plane that we painted orange. We're great partners with Feeding America. And I think that, we're, as a purpose-driven organization, we were regularly thinking about how we can serve in a different way. So I think that's that. I also think, Joe, to your question about the CXO, I think, every single person in Wheels Up is responsible for the member experience. Right. Period. Doesn't make a difference what you do. If you're a finance person, if the billing's wrong, that's a problem, right? So everybody's responsible for it. But, to make sure that it resides in one place to see the picture holistically, we should all be obsessive about it. I am completely obsessive about it, right? And making sure that we see the full picture from beginning to end, because even though everybody is responsible for it, how they address it could be very different. And the one thing that we've learned over the years in commercial and even private is people want a consistent experience from beginning to end. Right. I did a focus group with on the commercial side of some folks who were loyalists to a different airline. And they said, look, and this was earlier on in the Delta days when perhaps Delta wasn't where they are now. And these people said, look, we're loyal to this other airline, even though they're mediocre, because we know they're always going to be mediocre. Every time I get on, it's going to be a mediocre experience. With you, we never know what we get. We're going to have something really great and you're going to totally miss the mark, and you're going to go back and forth between what types of airplanes you're using and do you have the right product and everything else. And so, I think, part of my role is to really, drive, consistency across the entire organization to make sure, as much as everybody takes on that responsibility of member experience, that we're doing it in a manner that's thoughtful, consistent, and so in a manner that people aren't scratching their heads depending on who they call in member services or what they do if something goes wrong. One person kind of, hopefully, it's my team that can really help put a picture behind it and really put the plan together. And then all of us are engaged in doing it together.
Well, that was fantastic. Consistently mediocre, at least be that.
You don't
Which
want to
I
be like
agree.
a box of chocolates, as Forrest Gump would say.
Right. I know. When we get into stuff like surprise and delight, no. Let's just, just be consistently good, solid. Let's set a good baseline, and then we can have moments beyond that. Oh, that was amazing. So, Joe, thank you for jumping in and participating today as a surprise visitor, somewhat surprised, and all of you for coming and hanging with us on a Thursday and spending an hour in a conversation with Gail and Eric. Thank you too for participating. This was amazing. Always curious and interesting. And I look forward to Thursdays because of these events, and this did not disappoint at all. I love that we had a wonderful conversation and saw deeper into these two organizations and brands. That was really helpful. We have two guests and also a special guest for our next one coming up. It's going to be a Kellerfest. Look online for that one. That invite will be going out, but it'll be another kind of surprise guest scenario happening. I'm thinking like, anyway, and I love that Joe's been a guest on this before, and the fact that we have previous speakers show up and listen tells me that we have some really good intellectual minds showing up on the stage. So thank you for doing this, and to the audience as well. Kelly, any other last words?
No, just another thank you. Yes, Eric, great conversation. We knew. Thank you for joining us, and thank you to everyone in the audience. We appreciate it. Come see us again.